join us today and for our webinar to go over our overview of our legislative priorities for ISAC for the 2016 legislative session. We're also very pleased to have Jessica Monahan from the National Association of Counties first to give a brief overview of the FAST Act, which is the Federal Transportation Bill that recently passed Congress, and its effects that it will have on Iowa counties. Please, what we'll do first is have Jessica's presentation. Please submit any questions that you might have online, and then Jessica will address those after her presentation, and then Lucas and I will go over the ISAC's legislative priorities, and then we'll seek any questions that you might have after our presentation. So please submit those at any time. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As was mentioned, my name is Jessica Monahan. My role at the National Association of Counties is as the Associate Legislative Director who handles transportation policy. So this topic that I'm going to be covering today has really been my life over the last 2 years, and that is the reauthorization of federal surface transportation programs. As was mentioned, Congress recently passed a reauthorization bill. It's actually a 5-year bill called the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, or the FAST Act. Now, during my presentation, I'm going to give you some background on how we got to where we are today, giving us a little appreciation for what that final product entails, and then I'll dive into some details about what's included in the bill that's of greatest interest and importance to counties. So with that, if you go to the next slide. All right, so for the reauthorization process itself, it really began at the end of September of 2012, and that's actually when the last Surface Transportation Authorization Bill, known as MAP 21, was implemented. Now, MAP 21, unlike the bills that came before it, was only a 2-year authorization of federal highway and transit programs. That length is a bit unprecedented, and it really was only a 2-year bill because of some of the challenges that were facing the Highway Trust Fund. At the time that it passed, the popular thought was that when it was going to come up for expiration at the end of September 2014, Congress would just find money for the Highway Trust Fund and then extend MAP 21 for a few years thereafter to make it into a long-term bill ultimately. Well, during that period, instead of finding funding for the Highway Trust Fund and fixing the Highway Trust Fund, Congress instead had some changes underway. The Senate flipped from majority Democrat to majority Republican, and there was a new chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on the House side. So with all of that said, those dynamics ended up moving away from the popular thought that we would just extend MAP 21 and led us into a full reauthorization of federal surface transportation programs. I will say, in order to get to that point, though, we didn't just jump right into the FAST Act when MAP 21 was originally set to expire. Instead, we had to extend MAP 21 5 times. Those extensions aren't unusual. In fact, the bill that came before MAP 21, that being Safety Lou, was extended 10 times. Before that was T21, and that was extended 12 times. But with MAP 21, those extensions were a bit unusual, a bit unique, and that being due to the status of the Highway Trust Fund. So let's go to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit more about that, because it's really important when understanding what's coming down the pike next for transportation funding, now that we have the FAST Act in place. Well, the Highway Trust Fund is how we pay for federal highway and transit programs. It compiles revenues from federal motor fuel taxes, primarily the federal gas tax, which makes up 63% of all the Highway Trust Fund revenue, and then the diesel fuel tax, which makes up 24% of all Highway Trust Fund revenue. The remaining balance actually comes from other transportation-related fees, but obviously the largest source of the user fees paying into the Highway Trust Fund is that gas tax. And that's important to know when you think about why is the Highway Trust Fund had growing insolvencies? Why have we had such a hard time having enough money in place to pay for these programs? And in fact, since 2000, the Highway Trust Fund has been paying out at levels that exceed the amount of revenue that's coming in. And in fact, since the year 2008, Congress has had to transfer $65 billion into the Highway Trust Fund just to meet its obligations. If you want to think about it like a bank account, the Highway Trust Fund would be one bank account, and then we have the General Fund of the Treasury, which pays out for those other federal spending programs that you may be familiar with, some of those discretionary programs that have appropriated funds every year through the federal budget and appropriations process. The Highway Trust Fund has always been safeguarded. It was actually established in 1956. At that time was really created to build the interstate system under President Eisenhower. At that point in time, the gas tax was at 3 cents per gallon. It was then increased 4 times after that, 3 times under Republican presidents and 1 time under a Democratic president. And the last time it was increased was actually under President Bill Clinton in 1993, and that gave us the rates that we have today, that 18.4 cents per gallon we pay at the pump. And at the time that it was established at 18.4 cents per gallon, it was not indexed to inflation. So essentially, since 1993, we've been, at this time, we're still paying for our transportation system with $1993. And I'll get a little bit more into this here shortly about what this all means, but in all, the issues with the lack of inflationary indexing for the gas tax matched with more fuel-efficient vehicles, changes in human behavior and mobility patterns, it's largely contributed to these growing insolvencies of the Highway Trust Fund. Meanwhile, Congress has yet to do anything to fix this long-term solvency issue, and with that, that really created the biggest question at hand going into the reauthorization process, the question of how would we pay for it. And I will reveal that shortly. It's very exciting stuff, but ultimately Congress was faced with that dilemma while still trying to come up with a long-term authorization of federal highway and transit programs, policy, and funding. So while Congress continued to deal with that issue to try to answer the question of how we would pay for it, if you want to go on to the next slide, we'll talk about the policy stuff. So in Congress, we have committees that deal with the revenue side that have to solve the question of how we pay for this, how we fix the Highway Trust Fund, and then you have other committees that are just dealt with, well, once that funding is in place, how will we spend it? What are the policy provisions? And they're really the authors of the reauthorization bills. So rather than waiting around for Congress to find the money, the authorizing committees decided to forge forward with the reauthorization process, and we saw that really speed up in the last few months. In fact, the Senate turned out their DRIVE Act in July that passed the Senate at the end of July, right before they took off for August recess. And then the House followed up by coming back in October and revealing their reauthorization proposal called the STAR Act and passing that at the end of October. Now, the FAST Act, the bill that we have today, is actually a compromise between those two bills. After both chambers passed their individual bills, they came together through the conference process to come up with a compromise. And it's important to know that both the Senate and House bills originally were 6-year authorizations, but neither of them had full funding to meet the amount of money and the length of time they were actually authorizing the federal programs for. So the FAST Act, while it's only a 5-year bill, a year shorter than both the House and Senate bills attempted to provide, it is fully funded. And that's quite remarkable because how to pay for it was the question, and ultimately they didn't come up with a long-term solution for the Highway Trust Fund. Instead, they were digging deep through their couch cushions to come up with a number of pay-fors that they cobbled together, the largest of which is a Federal Reserve surplus fund essentially a rainy day fund at the Federal Reserve that they're going to take over $50 billion from in order to offset the $75 billion transfer to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent and to fully fund the FAST Act. So after the conference process and negotiation wrapped up at the end of November, Congress quickly moved forward with getting the bill passed through both chambers, and then on December 4th, the President signed it into law. So on the next slide, let's talk a little bit about what is actually in the bill and why it's important to counties. So about 2 years ago, NACo members developed a set of comprehensive priorities for federal surface transportation reauthorization. And we're very pleased to be on the phone with you and be in the webinar today telling you how successful we were. Now, both the House and Senate bills, those individual bills, did touch upon our priorities, but we're very pleased that the final product, the FAST Act, is sort of a combination of the best parts of both bills when it comes to addressing county priorities. Now, the first priority worth mentioning is that long-term certainty. As I said, it's a fully funded 5-year bill. That is the longest authorization to pass Congress in over a decade. That is, a lot of people said it couldn't be done, but fortunately it was done, and that's something stakeholders across the country are very pleased with. Next, and probably more importantly for counties, the FAST Act increases the amount of funding available for locally owned infrastructure and does so in a number of ways. First, it increases the amount of money for the Surface Transportation Program by about $4 billion over the lifetime of the bill. In addition, it opens up the National Highway Performance Program, the largest of all highway programs authorized by the FAST Act. It opens that up to all highway bridges, and that includes a number of county bridges. I would assume in Iowa, with the number of bridges that counties own, this would touch upon many of your bridges. So these are the on-system bridges that are not a part of the national highway system. Those can now compete for NHPP dollars within the state. That essentially makes available an additional $116 billion for locally owned infrastructure on top of the additional funding for the Surface Transportation Program. So together, this additional funding more than makes up for the funding decrease that we identified under MAP 21 that primarily occurred because of the elimination of the old highway bridge program. I believe, let me double check my numbers, but in Iowa that decrease was close to 32%. Nationwide, the average was about a 30% decrease in funding available for locally owned infrastructure, but these changes, which we worked really hard to get into the bill, will more than make up for that decrease. Next, on local decision making, we increased the amount of surface transportation STP dollars that are sub-allocated to local areas. That's about a $3 billion increase over MAP 21 levels. When you consider the fact that that program overall grows by $4 billion, the vast majority of that growth is actually getting sub-allocated to local areas and local decision makers. That's quite significant. Next, the off-system bridge program. We protected that. We continue that set aside under the Surface Transportation Program. That's at $776 million that is set aside for non-highway bridges. That is very significant for counties since we own, the vast majority of bridges we own across the country are actually off-system bridges. That set aside was born out of the old highway bridge program, and we're keeping with that old highway bridge program formula that was established based on bridge investment need and just carrying that through, extending it into the FAST Act. So that will continue to provide $776 million annually for off-system bridges. There were some attempts, I will say, to either dilute or completely get rid of that set aside, and we fought tooth and nail, and with many of your help, which we really appreciate, to keep that in the federal program. Next, we should mention for public transportation systems, the FAST Act increases funding for both urban and rural formula grant programs. It also establishes or reestablishes, depending on how you look at it, discretionary programs for buses and bus facilities. It actually creates a bus discretionary program as additional money on top of the bus and bus facilities grant formula program. So if you'll recall, MAP 21 did away with most of the discretionary programs, both on the highway side and on the transit side, and it became very apparent very quickly that that approach of just having formulas for bus purchases in particular wasn't going to go very far for addressing a lot of those bus buy needs, which are some of those lumpier purchases that maybe only come around every 12 years. That's the average lifespan of a bus, the useful life of a bus, although I'm sure many of you, if you're operating in transit systems or serve on the board, you know you try to get as much time out of those buses as possible, so many may be operating beyond that 12-year lifespan. But this discretionary program will be operated through FTA at the federal level. It is very similar to the old bus and bus facilities discretionary grant program that existed prior to MAP 21. So if you had participated in that program and competed for those dollars previously, that is back in play. That's great. And then also lots of provisions included in the FAST Act that build upon the efforts to expedite project delivery that were really put in place under MAP 21. And the National Association of County Engineers worked very closely with us on a number of these provisions. I will say that the list of all of them is quite extensive. I'd be happy to go in more depth if you have specific questions, but we're definitely continuing to move in that direction that MAP 21 set out, which was to cut red tape, to try to be more efficient with how we invest our federal dollars. And you know, I think there's still room for improvement in this area, but things like indexing the categorical exclusion under NEPA for projects of limited federal assistance, that being a lot of county projects, indexing that to inflation is going to be very helpful. That's one of the provisions. There is a provision for states that are participating in the NEPA delegation program to the states, where states can actually implement the NEPA process, take that away from federal highways, and they're the ones operating that. There's an expanded pilot so that you could substitute your state environmental law for the NEPA law. So this is a particular issue in California, I know, where the CEQA law, the state level environmental protection law, is quite stringent. In fact, is stringent enough to cover both federal and state requirements. So instead of having to comply with both NEPA and CEQA in California, those counties, if they participate in the pilot program, could then just satisfy CEQA, and that would take care of both NEPA and CEQA. So not sure if I was going to pursue that. I know that there's been discussions about Iowa participating in other delegation programs with USDOT. That is something more your state DOT would be involved with, but does provide an opportunity for local participation if they do participate in this new pilot. Other programs worth mentioning very quickly, there is an establishment of 2 new freight programs under the FAST Act. The first is the National Freight Program, which transforms the national freight policy provisions of MAP 21 into a new program. And there is a National Significant Freight and Highway Projects Program, which is very similar to the old projects of national regional significance. However, this actually authorizes, the FAST Act actually authorizes spending out of the Highway Trust Fund for this program and refocuses its mission on freight-related projects. But this would be available for counties. It's going to be awarded competitively by the Secretary of Transportation based on a number of criteria that's laid out in the bill. And it's sort of a freight-based Tiger program, if you want to think about it. You know, Tiger is not an authorized program, but this is, and this is going to receive about $900 million per year for 5 years for these major freight investments. There are set-asides under this program for small and rural projects. So I definitely encourage the Iowa counties to look forward to that program rolling out through the implementation process and weighing whether or not they should compete for some of that money. Finally, I'll mention that the Transportation Alternatives Program is still a part of the federal program. It just now exists as a set-aside under the newly branded Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. and it receives roughly $760 million a year over the lifetime of the bill. There's some additional flexibilities built into TAP under the FAST Act, and that would help provide an additional $550 million for STP projects, actually, because there's some additional flexibility there to flex the TAP money for STP projects, but that only applies in large urbanized areas with a population of 200,000 and above. So if you want to go to the next page, we can quickly glance over how they paid for the FAST Act. It's kind of an ugly list. Sometimes it's better, one of those things like better not to know sometimes, but if you have any questions about those, I'd be happy to try to answer them. I may knock on the wall of my office where on the other side it can be found our tax and finance whiz kid Mike Bellarmino here at NACo. But I know this question comes up often, so I thought I'd show you what can happen or what is buried deep in the couch cushions of Congress. And finally, the last slide is just my contact information. You may have questions for me today. You may think of a question later. I am always here to answer your questions related to federal transportation policy. I know many of you participate on our Transportation Steering Committee and have been involved in our advocacy efforts throughout the reauthorization process. For that, I am extremely grateful and appreciate your participation. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any at this time.
We don't have anything yet, Jessica, but we certainly, on behalf of Iowa, want to thank you for all of your hard work. Obviously, it's a strong state and federal partnership to get this done. Certainly, with what the federal government has done, what Congress has done in the last couple of weeks, and then add on the increase in the gas tax here in Iowa this year. It's certainly been a tremendous investment in Iowa road and bridge infrastructure, and so we certainly, from Iowa, can't thank you enough for all of your and NACo's hard work.
Well, thank you, and it's worth saying that, you know, what your state went through over the last year with the gas tax, hopefully something we can look toward as a country at the federal level, because, you know, the solvency of the Highway Trust Fund will remain in question. You know, we really only have enough funding to pay for the 5 years of the FAST Act. Beyond that, it's still going to be, you know, the question of how we pay for the next authorization. So that fight remains. And I also wanted to note for all of you on the phone that for Iowa specifically, the growth for federal highway program apportionments over the 5 years is a 9.6% increase. That's on average, it looks like it's about $520 million a year for the highway programs to Iowa. That is an increase above where we were for FY 2015, which was at $474 million. So that's some Iowa-specific information. Anything else you guys might need, feel free to contact me. We also have a ton of resources online, some kind of going through some of these provisions from the FAST Act. All of that can be found at naco.org/map21.
All right. Well, I don't believe we have any additional questions for you, Jessica, but again, we can't thank you enough for participating today and for all your hard work.
Thank you all.
All right. We will next move forward to ISAC's top legislative priorities for the 2016 session. And first of all, just kind of give you a brief overview of ISAC's policy development process. And our main primary body that drives our policy development is our Legislative Policy Committee, which is chaired by ISAC's second vice president, who this year was Peggy Rice, who's the county auditor in Humboldt County. The committee itself consists of 32 members, 2 from each of ISAC's affiliates, and its job is charged with developing the legislative objectives for ISAC's legislative team, which consists of me, Jamie Cashman, and Lucas Beenken, to pursue for the upcoming session. And they meet twice a year, once first in August for a 2-day retreat to go over proposals that are submitted by the various affiliates. And then in September, they meet again to provide recommendations to the ISAC board for what should be the objectives and possible legislative priorities for the next session. And the next slide here is the members of the Legislative Policy Committee from each of the various affiliates. And then again, just kind of give you an overview of the process itself. What the LPC does is it develops the policy statements and legislative objectives. A common question is, what's the difference between a policy statement and a legislative objective? Well, a policy statement, they express long-term or continuing statements of principal importance for local control, local government authority, and county operation. Basically, what these serve as long-time guidance principles for Lucas and I to look at if there is a certain issue that wouldn't be addressed by one of the objectives, that we have a piece of policy in place to guide us for any piece of legislation that would affect counties coming before the Iowa legislature. Legislative objectives are specific problems and solutions for legislators to address. Basically, these are the things that we seek specific bills to address each of these situations. And then above and beyond that are our top priorities. And these are the top items that we are seeking, that we meet with legislative leadership prior to session. That is our main goals to seek by the end of each session. And then the ISAC board reviews these proposals for approval at the October meeting, and then sets ultimately the top priorities. Over the years, they've ranged in number from 4 to 5. And then the legislative book is published, which consists of the membership then, the full membership votes then on the platform at fall school. There, if there's anything additional that membership would see fit to add to our legislative agenda, that's another opportunity for members to submit some additional items that might come up in the meantime. And then the full membership at fall school votes on the full platform. After that, the legislative book is published, which consists of our priorities, our legislative objectives, and our overall policy statements. And then, in the meantime, between now and session, Lucas and I are actively meeting with legislators that will be the main drivers, where there be committee chairs and then also legislative leaders to brief them on what our priorities and objectives will be. And then also we'll be meeting with the governor and the governor's office and his staff to talk about what we'll be addressing in 2016. For 2016, ISAC's top priorities are 5 things: delinquent court debt, distracted driving, E911 funding, food safety, and mental health and disability services. Now, first of all, to address delinquent court debt, in the closing hours of the 2015 session, the legislature amended Iowa statutes to address the issue of a collection of delinquent court debt. What those changes put into effect were a private collection agency would be the first focal point to collect that debt, replacing the Iowa Department of Revenue. And then typically, in years past, the Iowa county attorneys have been second line to collect that debt. Well, it would have been all well and good, but there's language in there that basically says if there is an installment plan with that private agency, that the county attorneys wouldn't have access to collect that debt. And as a result, this will dramatically decrease the amount of money going to county attorneys and a county general fund as a result of this. And a lot of these investments, counties were turning around and investing this money back into specific things like courthouse security. So this would have a tremendous detrimental effect at the counties and their general fund. Now, what we are suggesting is basically just to amend the statute to again allow the county attorneys to have access to collect that delinquent court debt and set that at a time certain beginning on day 31. This would still allow that collection of that delinquent court debt by that private collection agency, but then it would ultimately, if they weren't successful in doing that, would allow county attorneys to go ahead and collect that debt. The next one is on distracted driving. Obviously, I know many of you are well aware of what distracted driving means to Iowa and to the safety of Iowans, and has resulted in hundreds of deaths on Iowa's roadways each year. Obviously, there's not a simple solution to do that, but I think it's something that we see on a daily basis. Probably saw it on your way into your offices and into the courthouses every day by distracted driving. And so while that was addressed a few years back to address distracted driving specifically on texting and driving as a secondary offense, we believe this is such a tremendous public safety issue that this should be a primary offense, and that it should be distracted driving should be further defined with the use of a handheld electronic device, and to make that a primary offense. The next one is on E911 funding. I'm sure many of you are well aware of the stress that funding has been placed towards local public safety answering points, or PSAPs, and just the tremendous needs that are out there to provide an E911 service throughout Iowa. Obviously, the biggest portion of that funding comes from the E911 surcharge revenue. Obviously, that hasn't met the times in terms of addressing the full need of those E911 services, and as a result, county property taxpayers are filling in the gap. What we are suggesting is to support a new E911 surcharge funding proposal for PSAPs that increases the amount of money going out for E911 service delivery. Last year, there was an increase in the percentage of that money going out to local PSAPs. It was increased from 46 to 58%. Unfortunately, that language was line item vetoed. That's something that's still, again, since it hasn't been addressed, it's a very important priority for ISAC, and we'll be again pursuing an increase in that percentage. The other is on the statewide platform system that's out there. We are going to be again fighting tooth and nail against anything that would scoop funding for that statewide platform. We certainly want access for local PSAPs, but certainly something that we don't believe should be coming out of the E911 surcharge funding. The next is on food safety. As in the last 37 years, they've only increased food licensing fees just a couple of times, and obviously it hasn't met the cost of doing business. As a result of that, a lot of the county inspection programs have been returned back to the Iowa Department of Inspection and Appeals, and which has increased their workload. As you can see, since in 2009, DIA inspected 23 counties, and now today they inspect 52 counties. Obviously, which has increased their workload, and they haven't received any additional funding. It's decreased the amount of times and the frequency, the amount of inspections that DIA can get out there, which has resulted in increased risk for foodborne illness and for food safety. We obviously believe that at a local level we can do it better, and we can do it more frequently, resulting in increased amount of public safety in Iowa. So what we are doing, we're suggesting is increase the food licensing fees to fully fund our food safety programs in the county, and we should believe that DIA should be able to address these fees not only through Iowa Administrative Code, but there also should be an automatic fee adjustment based on the increase in the consumer price index. So we are addressing this every decade or so. The last one, oh, I'm sorry, not yet. Sorry about that. The next one is on mental health and disability services. The counties are stressing or dealing with the long-term funding solutions that we've been dealing with ever since we moved into a regional-based delivery system for mental health delivery in Iowa. Currently, the mental health funding for property tax collection is a frozen dollar amount in each of the counties, and these frozen levies were set back in 1996. And now it worked in years past because the county was able to, or the state was providing around $30 to $40 million at equalization funding. And that made up, that basically set an overall level of a cap of 4728 statewide, which met the mental health funding needs statewide. But as we've seen in the last year without equalization, there's going to be a tremendous amount of stress placed on counties within regions because of those caps that were frozen in years past. And because of those caps, you're going to see a disparity in levies within regions, and therefore, especially in regions that would have one urban county that would have a low levy cap, and then you'd have a number of rural counties within that region that wouldn't be able to raise their levies high enough based on the per capita amount to meet the overall financial need of that region. And further, without knowing a long-term, having a long-term funding solution, regions aren't making the investment in some of the further core and core plus programs that were a part of the overall, basically genesis for creating the mental health redesign. And so then not only are we seeing a disparity in funding, we're also seeing a disparity in the level and type of services that we're seeing statewide. So what we are suggesting is that the legislature update the mental health and disability services levy by establishing a new statewide per capita target that allows the county boards of supervisors to adjust the individual county levies based on the region's budget needs. So obviously there's additional oversight because of DHS has to approve the budget and service plans for the regions. There's some things in place that if there would be some concerns in terms of what that levy would be, but the main thing is the counties have to have the ability and the authority to address those. If the state is pulling their funding out of the system, the counties have to have the ability to raise what is necessary to meet the financial needs of their region. And the next, we'll address, now we covered the legislative priorities. Next, we'll go over the legislative objectives. These are other pieces of the legislation that we will specifically be seeking during this next legislative session that are another important part of our legislative agenda. And we'll first start out with Lucas with agricultural building value.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lucas. The problem with the agricultural building value is that it is included in the productivity formula, and as you probably know, the countywide valuation is a set number, so any additional construction of ag buildings creates no new taxable value, even though these buildings, especially confinements and the like, put a lot of stress on county roads and infrastructure. So our solution is to take the ag buildings out of the productivity formula, still tax them the way that they are taxed now in regards to the ag factor, but get them out of the total valuation of the productivity formula, and then dedicate this additional revenue to infrastructure at the county level. The next legislative objective is the ag exemption for zoning and building codes. For quite some time, these properties have been exempt, and what we would like to do is focus just on the farmhouses and do away with the exemption for both zoning and building codes for the farmhouses, and then for all agricultural buildings, get rid of the exemption on setbacks. And so this is just a public safety piece and a way to not only make sure that inspections are done and that these houses are properly wired and things like that, but then also the setback would ensure that there's enough room for transportation for those using the roads to be able to see, so that there's not a lot of drifting with snow in the winter and things like that.
The next is on bonding for county courthouse improvements. As we have seen our courthouses and county buildings rapidly aging through time, and also a tremendous need to improve courthouse security. There has been a tremendous need to provide the essential financial resources to address these needs. And one of the changes that we're suggesting is to change definition for county essential purpose bonds to cap them by the cost of the bond instead of what is currently in place versus the cost of the project, which will allow for projects to not only be bonded for part of the project, but also to be able to use additional outside revenue to meet the total financial need of that courthouse improvement. The next is on casino smoking ban. Now we have a smoking ban statewide, but except on the floors of our casinos, something our members feel it's tremendously important, and not only for the general public, but to extend the smoking ban also especially for our workers, our casino workers that work on those floors. So we'd like to see that casino or that smoking ban extended to casinos as well. The next is on conservation resources. Certainly, there's been a tremendous need over the past few years to provide a consistent funding source for water quality efforts and habitat development, as well as to fully fund REAP. It was first addressed by a constitutional amendment a couple of years ago that would use the first 3/8 of a sales tax increase to go to an outdoor recreational trust fund that would be constitutionally protected. I think it's past time that we need to make that investment. So we've already passed the constitutional amendment. Now we need to fund the fund, and so that's something we will be seeking as well this year. The next is on county courthouse furniture and equipment funding. As most of you know, the counties are charged and responsible for providing space for the court system in Iowa, and the state is charged with providing the necessary resources such as furniture and equipment funding for that court space. Fortunately, with some of the new projects that we have seen, the state has failed to meet their commitment to provide the necessary furniture and equipment funding. And so all we're doing is making sure that the state follows up on their commitment to provide the necessary furniture and equipment funding for county courthouses. The next, Lucas with county infractions.
County infractions is a new objective for us this year, and it deals with when there are zoning violations and the county needs to go in to abate or correct the violation. Currently, the county can seek a judgment against the owner when those corrections need to be made, but if they receive a judgment, it would likely be a lien on the property, and so there's really no way to effectively and quickly collect on those judgments. So our solution is to amend Iowa code so that these charges could be collected the same as a property tax as it is with public health and safety hazards under current law. Delinquent taxes for buildings on leased land is not a new topic, but a new approach to how to deal with it. As many of you are probably aware, many counties are facing difficulty in collecting property taxes on mobile homes and trailers. And when these go to tax sale, there's very little interest from the public for buying up those properties on tax sale. So with little other options, the county is faced with either having to clean up the property. It might be, if it's an abandoned mobile home, they might just tear it down, but of course this is at the expense of the other property taxpayers and citizens of the county. So our solution proposed this year is to charge the owner of the land the property taxes for both the land and the building, and then they would have the ability to work in those property taxes into their lease agreements for the portion that is paid on the buildings. The emergency power tax credit is also a new proposal this year. We are basically supportive of a new tax credit for convenience stores, grocery stores, gas stations, and fuel depots so that they can purchase backup generators. So in the case of a power outage in an emergency situation, they would be able to continue their business and provide those things that the people in the community really need, like food, water, and fuel.
And the next is on funding for co-location of Department of Human Services staff in county office space. As we've seen a number of DHS offices consolidate and go specifically into county offices, we haven't seen the amount of funding go back to reimburse counties for the housing of these DHS offices. And so this has resulted as an unfunded mandate placed on counties, and we'll be seeking a reimbursement rate for the co-location of those offices in county spaces.
Addressing a new or amended rule by the Securities and Exchange Commission as it relates to the Iowa Public Agency Investment Trust is another new topic this year. The rule came out about a year ago and would make significant changes to the way that the funds in IPATE are valued. It would go from, currently it's an amortized cost method of valuation, but it would switch to a market value. And so this creates a lot of, we believe this will create a lot of instability and could also affect the amount that is taken out after investment. So our proposal is, rather than switch to the market value method, or the other option under the SEC rule would be to go into a government fund, but this would, the major impact of that would be the change to the things that IPATE could invest in. So our proposal is to switch from being under SEC rules to going under GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And we believe that with this change to go under the regulation of GASB, that the rules would be pretty much the same and the investments would be the same as IPATE has typically operated since its inception. So it should be a small change to Iowa Code 12B to allow IPATE to be under the regulation of GASB rather than the SEC.
Next is on publishing notices. Counties are every year are spending upwards of close to $3 million to publish notices and resolutions in local newspapers. And so what we would like to see a change in Iowa's open records law to allow for the printing of just a synopsis or a summary of those notices and resolutions in local papers, but certainly allow to have have an electronic copy readily available, or mail out a hard copy out to anyone who would like that full resolution or notice. And the next is on prisoner medical costs. The Iowa Code isn't specifically clear at this time. We've seen it through case law between the county and the city, and also ultimately the prisoner, on who's responsible for the treatment of prisoner medical costs. We're just looking for a clear clarification of that, and now with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and the responsibility should be placed primarily on the prisoner to be responsible for the treatment of their medical costs. And so we'll be looking to clarify that.
Well, this past year was a big year for secondary roads. As we talked about earlier, the increase in the gas tax was a big win, and will provide additional funding that the counties can certainly use as they maintain their roads and bridges. But we still have some things that we would like to work on first. We believe that that both the state and counties would benefit from using federal funds at the state level and then using state dollars at the local level. And so this would just be a swap of federal funds for state funds. We believe the state is better equipped to comply with the federal regulations that come along with those federal funds, and then they would also have less of a burden to oversee those funds being used at the local level. So there wouldn't need to be quite as much oversight and auditing of those federal funds if they were all used at the state level. So it's really a win for both counties and the state if we were able to swap those dollars. We also are focused on maintaining the $225 million cap on Time 21. We believe that that should be maintained, and then any additional money over that $225 million would be distributed through the road use tax fund formula. And finally, we are supportive of the state excise sales tax on dyed fuels. Currently, the dyed fuels are not subject to the state excise tax, and we believe that it should be. And finally, user fees. This is something that we've worked on quite a bit over the years to attempt to get the fees that counties charge to be enough to cover the cost of doing business, for lack of a better term. Now, in some ways, this could be a fee increase, or in other cases, different affiliates have chosen to, rather than raise the fee, maybe work with state agencies to be able to retain more of the dollars they collect rather than sending more back to the state. So a couple of examples of the user fees that we'll be working on. First, the driver's license fee, and this is an example of one where we don't want to increase the fee for driver's license, but we think that the county should be able to retain $10 instead of $7 of every driver's license issued, and this would be an attempt to get that amount to cover the cost of providing that service. The parking fine and court collections, basically we would like to add a $5 service charge for when the county treasurer collects delinquent parking tickets for cities and when debt is collected for the court system. Currently, many counties have arrangements with cities within their borders where they will get to keep a portion of the parking tickets, but then that, of course, shorts the city, who doesn't get the full amount of the tickets that they issued. And in other counties, the arrangement doesn't provide for any service charge. It's just something that, out of the goodness of their heart, the treasurer is willing to do. So we think that they should be able to collect an additional $5 to pay for the service that they're providing. And finally, the writing fees for the county recorders would add a $1.25 for each certificate of title issued. And this would be for snowmobiles and ATVs, and this would bring them in line with the writing fee that's charged for boats.
And again, we also, on fees on sheriff civil fees, basically do increase those fees to best represent the cost of doing business. The next, just to talk about, that concludes as far as ISAC's legislative objectives for the year. Just to provide some additional tools during the session for folks that are interested in following the Iowa General Assembly. There is the Iowa Legislative website that provides a whole host of things as far as for bill tracking tools, and that can be found on www.legis.iowa.gov. And that also not only provides bill tracking tools, it has a list of committees and also legislators and email addresses, and also a whole host of Iowa administrative rules as well to follow along as well. In terms of ISAC's specific tracking tool, this is something that we have on our website that you can see there. That's the web address. And basically we track all bills that come before the Iowa General Assembly. Some are specifically are applicable to Iowa counties, and then we divvy those up and sort them by all of our affiliates. And as you can see there too, when you see in that staff column, that will be the specific staff that will be assigned, whether it's myself, Jamie Cashman, or Lucas Beenken, that you will see assigned. And also then on to the right, past the affiliate, you'll see the ISAC position. And that is whether we're registered specifically for that bill. If it's something that follows, let's say, a specific ISAC priority or objective or policy statement, will be for, or if it's something that we feel that flies against what we stand for, we'll register it against. A lot of it, you'll see you. That's basically that we're just we're just basically tracking that at this time, and we're just not basically, it affects counties, but it's something that we don't have a specific position on at this time. And so next, then also too, it can be used as a tool to filter by affiliate. So if you're just interested in treasurers, supervisors, sheriffs, or recorders bills, or public health, or whatever affiliate that specifically addresses you, you can have those bills sorted by a various affiliate. And lastly, get involved. There's various ways that you can participate in the legislative process. First is the, well, various ways, but the County Day at the Capitol will be March 9th, 2016, coming up, and we'll have all the affiliates will be coming to the Capitol to advocate on our objectives and our priorities for this year. Phone calls, again, on the legislative website, there are links to the phone numbers for the legislators at the Capitol, and also the email addresses, also as well as their physical addresses to provide the letters on whatever issue that you're interested in. And also then, typically, the Iowa General Assembly meets from Monday through Thursday, which allows them to go back to their districts on Fridays, specifically for legislative forums. So I would certainly recommend that you attend these forums and advocate on any other issue that you would be interested in. And then also, one of the biggest resources, specifically to Lucas and I, is on our update that we provide members every Friday. But the resource that you provide for us is the legislative comment form at the end of each of the items that we highlight. Any feedback that you can provide for us specifically in those comment forms is a tremendous asset to us for finding out specifically what's happening out in the various districts and how we can be better advocates on those specific issues. And so I'll entertain, Lucas and I will certainly entertain any questions. Certainly you can reach out to us at any time during the session. You'll see our phone number or email addresses, and at this time we'll answer any questions. Well, if there aren't any further questions at all, again, we want to thank you for your participation in this webinar. Certainly, again, I'll say Lucas and I couldn't do our jobs without your assistance, not only prior to session, but especially during session. And so please reach out to us at any time if you have specific questions about any legislation or questions about what we can be doing to greater advocate on behalf of the issues that are important to you. So I want to wish you and your families all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you very much.